Hello and welcome to This Is Just Ross and Chris chatting about Scottish property, in particular the private rented sector. 2020 has been one heck of a year. We're planning to do our own survey over the next couple of weeks to speak to the landlords and clients that we know, see how it's been for them, gather as much information as possible. So we've also been reading the brilliant Landlord Focus magazine that comes from the Scottish Association of Landlords, SAL. And on page 6 and on page 16 of the current Landlord Focus, there's some really interesting information relating to some of the survey that they did and their findings. We think anyway. Ross, what did you think was most interesting from those articles?
Well, on page 6, they give you a list of the calls they've received this year. So over the course of the year, they expect to get about 10,000 calls coming through their helpline to their landlords. And they compared calls over a period of time this year during the lockdown to a period of time in 2019, when obviously the lockdown wasn't even a thing we ever thought might possibly happen. So it was interesting to see how the level of calls increased or didn't increase or stayed the same this year compared to previous years. So you'd automatically think that the level of calls would increase as a result of what's happening. More landlords looking for some assistance, asking for help. So the data shows that there was only a 2% increase in calls landlords were making to the helpline during the period April to July 2020 compared to the same period in 2019, which we thought was unusual, didn't we?
Yeah. And anecdotally, are we allowed to say this? Because I think it's accurate that that SAL, since August, because this is obviously just up in, or is it just up until August? It would be, wouldn't it? August, September maybe. But most recently, the calls have still not increased massively to do with rent arrears.
They split them into some. They categorize the topics that people call about, so the monitors see where the most calls are coming from. So with regards to ending a tenancy, over that period, there was a 32% drop in the volume of calls they received about people asking about ending a tenancy, which you'd expect there to be so because, you know, there's a 6-month notice period involved, so maybe less tenancies were ending, although you might expect people to call in about the 6-month
notice period. What's that all about?
From regards to rent arrears, the level of calls had increased by 8%. On rent arrears, so the data sort of indicates that there wasn't a large amount of rent arrears that people were concerned about. Therefore, their calls were on par, very similar to the number of calls they had the previous year. One thing that it did indicate was a large increase in antisocial behaviour calls.
88% increase, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. It was an 88% increase in calls. Why do you think that was?
Well, I think maybe people working from home, and there can be other people that maybe wouldn't normally be at home, and when they are at home, they're making more noise than they should. Maybe I don't know. I did actually experience a little bit of it myself. In truth, you know, working from home, from a shed, and sometimes, you know, there's people being very loud for a very long period of time in the vicinity around here. And normally, actually, antisocial behaviour during the day isn't the worst. It's normally at night that it can be really bad for tenants and for people in general, you know. But maybe it's just people working from home. It's more impactful when there's noise during the day and they maybe hadn't seen it before. Yeah,
they might have been complaining about the noise that was coming from your shed, noisy telephone calls on the keyboard or whatever. Yes, yeah. So it could have been that
hard work. It's complaining about all the hard work noise that comes out of the shed. The other thing which goes maybe not against what you were saying, but there's a lot of stats to do with the fact that 44% of landlords said that they'd given a discount to their tenants in terms of rent. And obviously, it's great to see that landlords and tenants communicating and helping each other in that way. And the average seemed to be about 20% was the discount that was given. We don't know all the detail around the survey, obviously, and it's all there for people to read.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. You're right. You don't know whether there was the discount applied. There was no requirement to pay that discount back, or whether there was an agreement in place to pay the discounted rent back at some point later on in the future. Every landlord had that decision to make, and they did whatever was best for them. I suppose the other stat from the survey that was done in August, that results on page 16 of the Landlord Focus magazine, was that a fifth of agents had reported that 10% of their properties were unoccupied, and this was in August. So I suppose 10%. Does that surprise you to 10%?
I'm not sure, but I think it might have changed since then with the HMOs, because there was just over summer, all the multiple occupancy properties, all the student properties were just sitting empty completely. And so the students are back now. So I'd be interested to hear what the stats are now in terms of voids.
Yeah, I think that would be reduced. Going back to when I was a letting agent, I'd always say that 10% of your portfolio was on the being advertised, and some of these were obviously vacant, some of these were tenanted, but you're advertising as the tenants had given notice. So 10% doesn't sound like a lot compared to what we've gone through this year, but it's probably a lot. The void periods are probably a lot less now, perhaps. I think the average time to let in Edinburgh has gone up over this quarter. I think that's what the City Let's quarterly report had indicated, hadn't it? So it's taken a little bit longer to secure a tenant in Edinburgh, certainly.
I think other parts of Scotland, other cities, actually, it's been sometimes quicker. I think it's a supply and demand issue a little bit. That might do us in terms of discussing the Landlord Focus magazine. People should read it. I don't know if we're able to put a link. We can put a link to SAL and stuff on this, but.
Yeah, I think you can only access the magazine if you are a member. But if you're a landlord in Scotland and you're not a member of SAL, then you do need to sign up. They've got lots of helpful tools on their website for you to access if you become a member.
Okay, thanks very much. Is that everything, Ross?
That's everything, Chris. Thanks for that.
All right, cheers.
Yeah, bye.